Welcome to the Black Script Storytellers. My name is Kevin Marable, and today our guest is an award-winning author, workplace equity advocate, and now filmmaker. She's the best-selling author of The Memo, Right Within, and You Are More Than Magic. She's been a leading voice in reshaping how we talk about race, the power in the workplace, and her debut book, The Memo, was recently adapted into a short film, and she just wrote, directed, and produced her very first original short film, The Distance Between, a completely self-funded project that she handled from casting to the catering. We have with us today Minda Harts. Minda, thank you so much for joining. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you, Kevin. You're absolutely right. I have so many things now to add to my LinkedIn profile, so thank you.
Yes, you gotta count for all the accolades and everything that you've accomplished, and you gotta make sure that it's out there and you're letting people know, your resume for sure. For
Thank you.
sure. Now, with every interview, I like to start with a very simple question, but some people might find it a little difficult to answer. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
That question is, who is Minda Harts?
That's a great question. I would say that I am a living legacy. I am a direct beneficiary of my great grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother, and all of the work and decisions that they made and sacrifices allow me to show up as my full self. And so, I'm a beneficiary of their courage, and I keep making decisions, hopefully, to continue to make the legacy line proud.
Yes. We're always trying to make our families proud, leave a lasting legacy for ourselves and for our
Yes.
children and those who come after us. So it is very important. Um, and you're laying all that groundwork now. So that's awesome. That is awesome. So let me ask, what inspired you to adapt the memo into a short film?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've always loved movies. I've always loved film. It's just always been something. When I was younger, I'd like stay up late at night and watch Turner movie,
Oh,
classic, all of those
yes.
sorts of things. So it's just really fun for me. So before I even became an author, I thought I'd always go into films to some degree, but life tends to take you in different places, and I became more of a storyteller of my own stories through my
Mhm.
work. And so then I started to have conversations after the book's success, and different celebrities were reaching out saying, "Hey, I'd like to adapt this book. I think there's something here." And we had a lot of different conversations. But the one that really landed for me was when I met with Felicia Butterfield, and we were talking about it, and it just felt like this was the place to go. And I know we'll talk about, Kyla Pratt, but just the whole,
Yeah.
framework and self-funded and black women behind the scenes, it just really resonated with me. And the fact that I was able to be part of that, the writing room, being on set, some of the other opportunities that were presented to me would kind of push the writer out,
Mhm.
IP
Mhm.
wise. And so we're talking about legacy. It was also important for me to be part of the project.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it was good that they allowed you, the space to be able to come in and be a part of all of those different pieces to the puzzle that oftentimes, writers don't get any say to. They don't get to witness and see the process happen as the project is actually and the film is in production.
Right.
You really don't have any say so once you've submitted submitted the screenplay or submitted the script. So I'm sure that was truly beneficial for you as far as learning all of the ins and outs and being able to see it firsthand and how everything works and operates. But not only that, it also was fulfilling because it gives you a voice, and it allows you to continue to tell your story the way you want it to be told. And it's also, you're working with other women of color. Everything aligns for you.
Yes, yes. It made sense for the book, the premise, and also the, adaptation to film. It all worked together. It just was a no-brainer, right?
Right, absolutely. Now, you mentioned that you met with Felicia Butterfield. Um, how did that happen? How did that experience happen? Did she reach out to you online? Was it, several conversations through a third party and then you guys connected? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's funny with the connection that me and Felicia have because we had been friends online for years, right?
Okay.
Just hyping each other up, when Twitter was a thing, retweeting things, just like really supporting one another. And then during the pandemic, we were able to actually connect virtually. She was hosting some master classes on Friday nights. So she had reached out to me, hey, you want to talk, be a speaker at some of these projects. And so we got to know each other more and more. But it's so funny because back in 2018, she tweeted, if you don't know Minda Harts, she's somebody you should keep on your radar. I didn't have a book out at the time.
Wow.
I
Wow.
was, running these career boot camps in New York City for women of color. But, I'd not met Felicia. I was listening to her podcast. She was already, doing major things. And so she was
Right.
just someone that I looked up to. So I was even shocked that even at that point, she knew who I was, and I, screenshotted that because I'm like, what? Felicia Butterfield knows I exist, and then
Yes.
later, several years later, she reaches out and says, "What are you doing with the memo? Let's meet for dinner." And we both had ended up moving to Los Angeles from New York City, and we met up in Beverly Hills for dinner one night. And she's like, "I wanna adapt the memo," and it was pretty much was the rest was history. I'm like, let's do it.
Wow. That's amazing.
Yeah,
Especially the fact that, of how you guys connected online and then, you stayed in contact, constant contact. She actually brought you onto her platform and you were able to speak. And the fact that your name and your face and everything that you were doing just remained on her mind. She circled back when the time was right.
right.
And,
Those
uh,
early seeds, right? You just
yeah,
never know.
yes,
You just
yes.
never know.
You're right. You absolutely never know. And it's really important to have those connections, have those relationships, and build those bridges. Great things can come from that for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Now, as far as landing Kyla Pratt on the project, and everybody else in the cast, obviously, but how did that process go?
Yeah, Kyla was phenomenal as me. It was I was just like happy that we're making the memo into something, right? So I hadn't even got that far in terms of, who would play me and those sorts of things. And then Valicia was saying, you know what, I think Kyla Pratt would be really great. She's well loved in our community. She's like the cousin that we all know and grew up
Yes.
with. And I think she'd really do a great job. She had seen her recently in a stage play, and it was on Felicia's mind to like, what, I think as an adult I'd love to see Kyla in this, and
Right.
so
Yes.
she reached out to Kyla's people, and then we all met at the Soho House in West Hollywood, and we were talking, and it was just, again, we all got the reason, even though Kyla had never worked in corporate America but in the industry, right? There's things that you deal with at being a woman or a person of color. And she
Yes.
had a lot of friends who work 9 to 5s and they were dealing with some of this stuff. And so she understood the
Yeah.
importance of telling this story, telling Minda's story. And so again, every person that Valicia, it was almost like she was the fairy godmother, right? Every person she went to, said yes. And it just worked out that everybody was happy to tell the story because it was a story that we talk about in the group chat, but never really out loud. Right. And
Mhm.
so it
Mhm.
was really cool that, Kyla signed on. And then from there, it was easier to get other cast members. And we had just a great cast and crew.
Yeah. What has been the audience takeaway from this film?
It's fun to watch, like, kind of like from the back of the room when people are watching it for the first time, because the
Yeah.
gasps, right, the acknowledgement, the like, oh my god, yeah, that happened to me, or I just left that situation, or no, she didn't say that, in the workplace. Those very egregious things that are said in meetings, but also the subtleties that show up each and every day that hurt just the same. And so just the way that people, it's a 22-minute short film, but people are strapped in like the whole time and on the ride. And so it's just been great, whether we've been doing screenings, at a film festival, or we do it at a private screening at a company, just to
Mhm.
see people very much locked in. And for the first time, even those who have never read the book saying, wow, I feel seen. Thank you for telling the
Yes.
story. Even in
Yes.
the climate, in our country right now, I think it resonates in a different way than when people saw it last summer versus more recently. And so it's just been another way to remind people that your careers matter, your voices matter, and, find a place that works for you.
Yeah, yeah. And what, regardless if it was last year or this year,
Yeah.
the theme behind it is, resonates across. We all have been in similar situations. It's something that's important to speak about, not only, just with women of color um, on a regular, consistent basis, but also just in the workplace, like you said, in corporate events, corporate screenings. It's important to talk about these things so other your colleagues, other like-minded individuals can understand how to navigate and what to say, what not to say, and how you should you know move in the workplace. You recently wrapped your own short film, The Distance Between. What is the film about, and what motivated you to tell this particular story?
Yeah, it's wild because during the pandemic, so around 2020, I knew that I wanted to tell stories in film and TV format, but I was like, well, I'm this author, public speaker. How am I going to make that transition? There's not a lot of people who have gone from best-selling author in that way, and then very few, and especially those who look like me and you, who go from author to filmmaker, right? If you're
Yeah.
not like Stephen King, and I but so what I decided to do is start taking screenwriting classes. So I started taking screenwriting classes a few years ago, even before there was any talks of any adaptation of the memo. And I said, okay, I have stories I want to tell outside of the workplace. I'm going to be perfecting these scripts and take these courses at UCLA. And, when the time is right, you don't have to stay ready if you're ready, right? So,
Right.
and then after we did the memo, it just pushed me to say, what am I waiting for? I have scripts here in final draft. I have things
Yes.
that I want to put out. And so I said, you know what, I'm going to put this out. There's never going to be a right time to do, anything. You just have to take the leap. And so
Mhm.
I started to like put the numbers together, pull my coins and some other things. And I said, I want to tell a universal story of friendship, how many of us might have had friendships from our youth that we thought we were ride or die forever, right? And now you don't even know what their middle child's name is. Right? Not because you don't want to, but or you don't think about them, but life just it takes
Right.
hard work to keep up relationships. And so I wanted to tell that story of just the highs and lows of friendship and making the decision, am I going to invest in this or am I going to let it go? And so the distance between is between two friends from, you know, 16 to their, early 40s, and just how they're trying to keep up with the relationship, but some of them fall short at different periods in their
Right.
life. And I think we all either experience that today or have at some point in time.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I can name a slew of friends that I would love to stay in contact with, but just because life is always lifing,
Yep.
you can never stay up to date with everyone, right?
Hmm.
We all have families and we all move about and start our careers and whatnot. So
Yep.
now through that process, you said that you funded it yourself, you wrote it, you directed it, you even provided the catering, you did everything.
Everything.
um, how long was this process once you had the screenplay ready and you decided, you know what, I'm going to set out and figure out how to do my own short film and produce it all by myself?
That's a another great question. So again, sometimes we can be like our worst enemies, right? And so
Yes.
a good friend of mine was saying, Minda, why aren't you putting your own things out there, your own films, out into the ether? And I'm like, well, because I don't, I don't have the money to get it done, and this, that, and the other. And she just kept saying, you just do a short film. You have this, certain scripts. Think about
Mhm.
which one you want to do. And this was literally around February of this year, 2025. And I was like, I do have something that I think I could, blow off and dust off and like tweak a little bit. And I went back to my drawing board and I said, okay, I think the distance between would be a really good entryway to allow me to reintroduce myself like as this writer and creator in a different way. And so I said, okay, I'll give myself a deadline. I want to be able to shoot this by the end of March. So I was at a
Mhm.
tight deadline. It
Yeah.
was a 6-page script, and I just started, getting on some of the casting network sites. And I knew that I only wanted to have 2 characters. So that made things a little bit easier. I wanted to tell the story in a car through decades, right? So that also
Yeah.
contained how, our location. So I was really intentional about how I can get this done and tell the story the way that I want to. And I just started putting myself out there, and literally less than 2 months later we were shooting a 2-day shoot of the distance between. I casted, found we had a 12-person crew, and it was just a really amazing experience, a very humbling one, because for anybody who has written and produced and directed their first for the first time, there's things you do not know, things you're like,
Yeah.
oh God, I didn't know I needed that, right? And so I had just a really great crew around me that were like, okay, now this is where you're supposed to do this part, right? And so
Right.
I learned so much, but I'm glad that I, to your point, did everything from, making sure the bathroom had, paper towels, so that now when I do another film, I understand what it's like to be the PA. I understand what
Yes.
it's like to produce and source and do props, right? So I have an understanding of where these things are, and I'm really glad that I was able to do that, and that some really amazing people who've worked on big films said yes to me because they loved the story. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, no, it's definitely vital to learn all of those things, all of the ins and outs, so that way you understand everybody's job. You can learn to be more efficient through over time as you work on, project to project. You learn how to shrink things down and do things a lot faster. But of course, in your very first time doing it, everything is going to be slow paced because you want to make sure that you're getting it right. There's going to be things that you missed. Even when all is said and done, you go back to look at it, all the footage and want to edit. You're like, oh, I missed that, or I should have
Yep.
done it this
Yep.
way. Or but at the end of the day, is that you started. You
Hmm.
actually you know sought out to do this, and you did it through fear, and you pushed forward. And you put your own money where your mouth is. You're investing in yourself, and so however this short pans out, this is your baby.
It's my baby.
And this is your starting point, your entryway into saying that you are a writer, director, producer, um, hopefully at some point maybe actor.
Yeah, I don't know about that one. I'm gonna let the actors act, but I am. It's possible, right? If I can do it,
Yes.
the next person can do it. And there's so many
Yeah.
people who are waiting on you. Your helpers are waiting on you. And I'm going to be submitting The Distance Between literally this weekend to its first film festival. And I couldn't be happier. I've done a lot of things, Kevin, in life, but I think in my life, but this is probably one of the proudest moments because anything you start from scratch. I did
Yes.
that with my other books too, but it just feels different, and you want people to feel away, and the conversations that I think will come away from seeing The Distance Between will either reconnect a lot of people or keep those relationships where they are.
Right. Right. Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's a little different than writing a book, even though
Yep.
I feel like writing a book is difficult.
Hmm.
I don't take that lightly or think it's an easy task at all. But to be able to write a screenplay and then take those words and transform it into something that's visual, but also physical because you're feeling emotions, it's mental, all of those
Hmm.
things. And then you send it out to the world, and then you're going to get a barrage of feedback and
Yes.
criticism, and you're going to see people's reactions, and you don't really know what that's going to be like until it's out there. So it can be very scary, but it's all, like you said, it's a proud moment. You could say that you did it all by yourself. Nobody helped you. Nobody fronted you the money. Um, and it helps you learn how to create a project from start to finish. If you don't mind me asking, what film festival are you submitting it to?
So we have about 10 that we're looking to submit to. And so the Austin Film Festival is one of them, the San Francisco Film Festival, and then some, smaller local in LA where I live. There's a lot of different Hollywood shorts and things like that. So we're going to
Sure.
just put it out there and, allow my work to be shown in that way. And even if it doesn't get accepted, knowing that I have this body of work. And so I'm working toward uh, two other short films right now that I'm, hope to get into production soon. I'm kind of taking the lens of some of the film schools where they put their people through three, you do three short films during during your tenure. And so
Yes.
I want to be able to kind of, I'm putting myself through my own kind of film school. And so having three films out there that showcase different things and keep getting better, to your point, is that's
Mhm.
the goal that I'm on. And then hopefully something will happen after that.
Yeah, absolutely. And kudos to you because you're taking it seriously. You're putting yourself through the ringer, so to speak. You're putting in your 10,000 hours and all of that good stuff.
Yep.
You're not cutting corners. You want to be official and not be taken lightly,
Yes.
when you go to do your full feature or your series or whatever the case may be. So yeah, that's definitely commendable. But you can start that process at any point. I'm sure you're actively writing other things as well.
Yes.
But it's good that you started with this film, A Distance Between, or The Distance Between, and then you have two more, and then from there, I'm sure you're going to pitch to studios and feature films and whatnot.
that
But
that is the goal. So we're gonna keep our
yeah,
fingers crossed.
it's going to happen. Not
Yeah.
not we're not going to keep our fingers crossed. It's going to happen. We're going to speak truth to power, speak
Yes.
it into existence. It's going to happen for sure.
Yep.
Not if, but when. Right?
When, absolutely.
Yes. Yes. And you're already actively doing the work that is necessary to get there. So that is commendable for real. What would you say was probably the most challenging from creating this short film?
I think for me there were probably two things, because I only had two characters in the script. It was really important to make sure chemistry was there.
Yes.
And so even though I liked individual actresses as I was casting, going through the auditions, but knowing who's going to do well together, right? Who are people going to gravitate to? And because the scenes are in a car, like all six scenes, it's very intimate. And so I think for me, I probably put a lot of emphasis on, I have to get this pairing right. Right. And so
Yes.
it took me probably longer to cast than I had planned, because I really wanted to get it right. And we did a few chemistry reads. I did them, with different pairings. And then I finally, found the pair that I felt could tell the story of the distance between Yasmin and Elaine. And I'm so happy, because I think even maybe some people are like, "Are these the right ones?" I'm like, "No, I see it. You have to see the vision, right?" And now
Right.
when I show some of my friends some of the screenings, they're like, "Wow, their chemistry really came together." And it's really, I think for me, because I had only done this for the first time, I was like nervous that I was second guessing myself, right?
Mhm.
But
Mhm.
I think what I learned was that go with your gut. You know what story you want to tell. And then I think the other part of it is you can shoot a film, but you also have to have permits and insurance and all of
Right.
these things that are
Yeah.
not planned for. And I think that's the part that I'm appreciative of, like shows like yours and different resources out there, because it's not just you found your people and go do the film. There's so much other things, that so you don't get in trouble and don't get sued, and it's just a lot. And I think those were
Mhm.
moments where I wanted to like slide down the wall, because I was just so overwhelmed.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a lot of those moments, throughout the process. A lot of things that we don't think about when we're writing or even when we're filming, and going through the process. Even in the writing portion, you have
Mhm.
to make sure that what you're writing is something that you can actually film within your budget,
That
and
part.
that you can obtain that location. Maybe make if it's something to do that's sci-fi or involves some visual effects. Can you afford to do that? Do you have the technology to do that?
Yeah.
Um, so you definitely have to be mindful as to what you write, especially in the very beginning when you are working on a shoestring budget or a smaller budget, and you want to make sure that everything falls within that budget. You don't want to go over budget, and you also want to make sure that you can't cut any scenes because it's just not possible.
Yeah.
Uh,
You
so
said
I
something
can
really
imagine.
important, Kevin, that I think for those who are already making films but are thinking about making them, or early filmmakers, is you're scripting when you're writing, thinking about how the words come out, right? As a
Yes.
writer, author, I can write a certain paragraph because nobody's actually saying that in dialogue, but it comes across different. And then things that I think are cool, like a lot of my early script had all of these song moments to showcase the decades that we're transitioning to, right, inside the car, and music played a really big element. But then I was like, oh, wait a second, I'm gonna have to cut some of this because I'm not gonna probably get the rights to some of these songs.
Right.
Right? It's
Yes.
like all of these
I was just thinking the same thing. You have to license all of that.
things. So
All
yeah.
of that has to be cleared for sure. Yeah.
So you're like, wait a second, that big number that I thought they were going to sing to each other in the car. Okay, now we have to like scrap it because I can't get
Right.
so and so to. I don't have the
Yeah.
money to get this cleared, right? And so I think as I've written other scripts or tweaking them, I'm like, okay, yeah, am not playing that song that I thought, or we're not going to be doing it at the casino because this is a lot harder. You just start to
Mhm.
learn what's feasible and
Right.
doable and realistic.
Yeah, 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 and a lot of it is really learn as you go, learn through
Hmm.
experience, or it's something that you just pick up along the way that you've seen other
Hmm.
people do, or advice that you've been given or has been passed down. You're not going to learn everything overnight,
No.
and there's always going to be some type of obstacle in your way. Even when you feel like you've gotten over every single obstacle, there's always something, right?
Yep.
Um, but the fact that you push through and are able to actually complete the task and finalize the production, and then you have the final product at the end of the day, that's something that's satisfying and that nobody else can take away from you. It's the best feeling in the world, I would
It
say.
really is. It really is. It's so satisfying. I'm like chomping at the bit to get back out, out there and be back on set.
Yeah, yes, because once you do it once, you
Yeah.
want to keep doing it, and then you every time you do it, you want it to be bigger and better for
Hmm.
sure.
Yep.
Yeah, and you'll, like I said, you're gonna get there. You're gonna get there. Do you see yourself continuing to write films, or are you also going to continue down the path of author and write books and then transform those books into film projects?
Yeah, I think yes, and so I have a couple of other books that I would love to see adapted at some point.
Uh,
So, maybe that will be me adapting them, maybe it'll be somebody else. But what I'm really focused on is really moving into my filmmaker era of life. I've written 3 best-selling books. My next book comes out in a couple of months, and so I kind of hope that that can be like my Jay-Z moment, like my farewell kind of tour. Like that was like that real big moment where you and then you got a the Black Album. So I ride
yes.
off on a high note, and then I move into my next era, the business era of me making films and telling stories of humanity, dignity, and the human element. And I really love narrative, and so for me it's as I think about the next chapter of my life, I really want to double down on filmmaking. And so I've been building up for this moment, and so I'm here to stay.
Good, good,
Yeah.
good. Now, I do have a question. It does involve filmmaking, but it also involves the author side of things, and being an author. I'm not sure if you go through a publisher or if you have your own publishing company. I did not stop to look at that, so I'm not sure if you do or not.
Yeah, great question. So I have been very fortunate and blessed to all of my books have been with a top publisher. There are, I think, now maybe top 4 publishers. So all my books have been through traditional publishing houses, and I've been very blessed to be able to say that, because less than I think 2% of women of color get traditional book deals. And so
Yes.
I've always been the type of person that you give me 2 fish and my loaves and I'm going to feed the multitude, and that's what I
Yeah.
did with my
Yeah.
books. And I didn't have a lot of followers at the time, or wasn't well known, but I had stories to tell, and the right people said, yeah, I guess you do have stories to tell. And I'm four books in, and so I just want to encourage those out there. You have stories to tell. You don't have to wait on anybody else. You can tell those stories, right? And the right people will say yes to you. Don't focus on the no's, focus on
Right.
the people who are going to say yes and see you.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
Absolutely. And you're going to hear no more than you're going to hear yes, regardless in this business.
Oh my
Uh,
God. Like, with the Memo, so the Memo became, it is still in the top 50 best-selling career books.
mhm.
And it came out in 2019. And I had four of the five major publishers say no to the Memo. They said, "Oh, this book will never sell. This is
Wow.
isolated situations that are happening in the workplace." And all it took was one publisher that said, "You know what? We haven't told this story out on the bookshelves. Let's try it." Right. And now, if you go to certain bookstores, you're going to see more stories like mine because this book created space for that. And so I want to
Yes.
encourage people that, four out of five said no, but all you need is one.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. All it takes is one person to pave the
Yes.
way, to open the
Hmm.
door. Um, that's really important as well. And not let the no stop you. Keep pushing forward.
Yeah,
Eventually, you will get to the yes.
you will.
But I was asking all of that because I'm actually leading somewhere that I believe is a gym that I think more of us should either attempt, try our hand at, or attempt to do. And the fact that you're already in the writing, like the author world, but you're also in the filmmaker world. Um, you can have IP in both areas, right? And then
Hmm.
that IP can translate into a film. And then not only that, a lot of studios look to see if, you have more than one IP that can go towards a project. What a lot of successful people who are in the industry are doing now, and there's a few here and there, but I guess my next question was going to be, have you ever thought of starting your own book club? And the reason why I asked that is because I know Oprah has one,
Hmm.
Reese Witherspoon has one. Um, Now, Tressa Azarel from Megamind Media, she doesn't necessarily have a book club, but she has her own publishing company. She started writing her own novels and then
Hmm.
published them herself. But the reason why I say all of that is because what they would do is they would find popular stories within the book club or
Hmm.
within their publishing house or whatever the case may be, and then they would adapt those stories into film and
Yeah.
continue down that process. And so it made it a lot easier for them to find new projects, but they were already attached to successful IP.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up because that's so important. I think that's why you see the success of like Reese Witherspoon, for example, with Hello Sunshine. I mean,
Yes.
she almost like catapulted her net worth with this, new
Yes.
development in the books. And I actually have a friend who was part of her book club, and that instantly went to New York Times bestseller, just having that
Mhm.
connection to Reese Witherspoon, right, in the book club.
Right.
And Reese ended up adapting that into documentary that's on Netflix, right, called Fair Play. And those are things that are capable of doing. And I know Valicia with her media company, her IP also is adapting these successful books into
Oh,
short
okay.
film. And so,
Okay.
so I'm excited about continuing to support women like Valicia. But for me, what
Yes.
I would like to do in the future is have an imprint through one of the traditional publishing houses and create space to where authors who want to write books, who also want to tell stories in film and TV, that there is this play that works with two levers, right? So,
No, that's brilliant.
yeah.
Honestly, that
Hmm.
is brilliant.
Yeah.
And not too many people think of that. Some people
Hmm.
think you got to be on one side or the other when you
Yeah.
actually can play in both
Yes.
arenas and be successful in both arenas.
Absolutely. There's a guy, Dennis. I can't think of Dennis's last, how you pronounce Dennis's last name, but he did Shutter Island. I believe the book is called, and it was Leonardo DiCaprio was the
Yes.
lead in that, and so he was an author and he wrote like some successful books. And now Dennis is a showrunner for a couple of different shows. One in
Yes.
particular. On Apple TV. And so it's possible, right, to do it and have that IP and do the transition. But we need more people who definitely
Right.
look like us to show that it is possible to play in both of those spaces.
Right. Show that it's
Hmm.
possible, but also know how to navigate.
That too.
So,
Yep.
yes. because oftentimes these studios are already looking for people who are already in place, already in position,
Yeah.
already successful, and have been successful. That way, it's an easy no brainer. They bring them in, they sign new deals,
Yeah.
whatever the case may be, and they get 10, 15 projects, first look deals and all
Hmm.
types of things. Um, and it just makes it easier for the studio to continue to win and, bring these new exciting shows that we think are only shows, but they stem from books.
They stem from books. I mean, Sirens. I don't know if you're watching Sirens right now, but
Not
that.
yet, but I seen I saw the trailer for it. I just
Yeah.
haven't had a chance to watch it. I may watch it this weekend.
Yeah. So again, like you said, there's so many opportunities of books that are being, using the IP to tell these stories and adapt them. And so we should be part of that as well.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Now, I'm going to bounce back to the memo for just a second. The memo has become a must read for women of color navigating corporate America. What do you think still needs to change in corporate culture today?
Hmm. You know, for me, it's interesting because when the memo first came out, I would get booked to speak at different places, and some of the executives would say, "Okay, well now don't tell too much of this story. Just tell a little. These things aren't happening here, so talk about it from the place across the street." Right?
Right.
And then I'm like, "Okay, isolated situations, whatever you say." And then the unfortunate racial unrest that took place, in 2020, and the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, and then companies were like, "Oh, let's talk about these things right now. Let's talk about it. Talk about them hard. Talk about them as
Right.
much as you want." And now we're kind of back in that space of, I don't
Yes.
know if we talk about it at all. And so for me, I feel like it's this push and pull, and that's
Yeah.
why stories like the memo are still important. That's why people still resonate with this book and the stories being told in the book and the film, because this is everyday life for a lot of people, right? Two things can be true. We can have
Right.
colleagues that never experience inequity in the workplace, and then we have ourselves or someone we know that experiences unfair work environment each and every day. And so what I will say is there's a lot for us to still lean into, and we still have to normalize these difficult conversations in the workplace. And I'm
Mhm.
glad that the memo in film format can reach some people who don't read books, right? And
Yes.
to remind people that these stories, our stories, are still important. And so I think for me, I'm still very optimistic because we're still talking about it. And as long as it's still a topic of conversation, then there's room for improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
then not only that, film is a format or a genre that can keep our history alive and can keep a lot of our issues, not necessarily issues alive, but can
Hmm.
continue to tell the story of a lot of the hardships that we face on a day-to-day basis, instead of it being erased or ignored or turn the other cheek. Um, I feel like this medium is a medium that they can't stop,
No,
so
they can't.
the more we tell these important stories, the better. And no matter how difficult it is to tell the story, we should all try to get these stories out, because if we're going through it, obviously somebody else is going through it.
Absolutely. And we get to control the narrative on our terms, right? That's the wonderful thing about filmmaking is we get to decide how the story ends, right? In our
Right.
real lives and on the screen.
Now, your follow-up book, Right Within, and you also have You Are More Than Magic. If you could just briefly tell us a little bit about both of those books.
Yeah, so right within all of my books have some kind of like musical. I like to write business books with pop culture,
Okay.
teaching the the way, and so you see that in the memo film, like using some of the music that I use in the book. But then also right within came from Lauren Hill's "How You Gonna Win If You Ain't Right Within." Like
Yes.
our work environments, we can't change oftentimes who our manager or who our colleagues are, so there is some inner work that we can do so that we don't feel like traumatized in some of these toxic work environments. So right within was came out in 2021. It was all about healing from toxicity, right? What does
Mm.
it look like to center ourselves? And then In 2022, You Are More Than Magic, which is my first young adult book. And that was just letting our young adults know that your voice matters right now. You always have your voice, and here are the tools to leverage that a little bit more, because some of the things that I write about in my adult um, nonfiction books, I realize that teenagers and young adults need this information way before they get to the nine to
Yes.
five. So I wrote them a love letter on some things that I wish that I would have known at 16 and 17.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, that's very important. And, you know, not a lot of households have these conversations as
yeah,
well. You kind of
right.
just thrown into the fire and experience it, and you have to figure out how to deal with it, or move on.
Right,
So
period. So I'm like,
uh,
I want them to have some tools I didn't have,
yes,
right?
yes. No, that's a really smart move, and we need a lot more of that, because we oftentimes don't get the guidance that we need when we go out into the world.
Yeah.
So if there's, a book, a manuscript, instructional step-by-step instructions, this is how
Hmm.
you do it, or this is what you should do should you encounter this.
Absolutely.
Um, those are smart ways to write things. Now, was this something that you always wanted to do as an author? Was write your stories this way, or did it just come about naturally to incorporate the knowledge and the education into your writing?
Yeah, I kind of stumbled into it, I'll say, because I since I was a young girl, always wrote poetry. So I'd have my journals, and I'd always write, and I'd write short stories too. But I never thought that they would be anything past my consumption, right? Me in my bedroom, just make believe, right? And when I was in my 9 to 5 job, I was going through a lot of hard times in the workplace, being the only woman of color, only Black woman in my industry. And so I used writing. I came back to it and started this archaic thing called a blog in 2015. But I see blogs are making a resurgence, right?
Yes, yes,
so so in
yeah.
2015, I started, while I was in my 9 to 5, I started writing what I called Monday memos. And every Monday, I put out this newsletter about different things that I was experiencing. And here are some tips on how you navigate this situation in the workplace. And eventually, that blog became popular, and I had the opportunity to get my first book deal, right? But I never that blog was more therapy for me, just as an outlet to be able to talk about the things that I can't actually say to my boss or my manager. And so after a few years of writing that blog every Monday for, like 6 years,
Wow.
then I had that opportunity. But again, I just did what felt natural to me. I didn't no brand deals in sight. No, I didn't
Right.
think anything past my mom and my brothers would be reading this blog. Right? And then eventually it started to stick, and other people were like, wait a second, I'm dealing with that too. Let me pass this along. And the Memo became the first book by a major publisher about the experiences of women of color in the workplace. And if you would have told me when I started that blog, Kevin, in 2015, that would be the case, and I'd write a couple other books to follow, I never would have guessed. So you have all of everything we have is already inside of us. We just have to
Yes,
activate
absolutely. Absolutely. Like,
it.
not only that, people don't realize how powerful words are and
Hmm.
how powerful everybody's experience is,
Yeah.
because if it's like I said earlier, if it's something that you're going through, somebody else in the world is also going through the same thing, and if it's not the exact same thing, it's a close second.
Yeah.
And we're all trying to figure out how to cope, how to deal with things, how to navigate, how to move up in life,
Hmm.
how to be successful, how to treat other people, all types of things,
Yeah.
right? So, you sharing that with the world, you didn't realize it, but you were ultimately changing lives, one post at a time,
Well, one post
until
at a
until it became a book. So,
time. Yeah.
that's amazing. And then also there was a driving force that pushed you to continue this day
Hmm.
in and day out.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
I wanted to help people more than myself. And I think when you create and you're from a place of, vulnerability, and you really want to make an impact on people, even if you don't know what that impact will ultimately be, I think that, everything opens up for you the way that it needs to. And so again, for those people, a lot of people, I made the post on threads this week, for people who have stories that haven't been told yet, remember that revolutionary ideas take time because it requires people to change the way they think, right? And
Mm,
some of the things that, started today may not catch on as a thing, right? Or maybe a genre until later. But you don't need permission to start writing that kind of story or creating that genre now. And so
yeah,
I'm living proof that there was no market for the books that I was writing, and I was the one that cracked that door open. And there are tons of other women of color who get to write books now because the memo was successful, but not by myself, because of people who
right.
consumed, right? The
Yeah.
buyers, the people who want the story that you have to tell.
Yeah. But you can actively say that you're a leader in that space,
I can
Uh,
say humbly, I will say.
yes. 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 That's awesome. That is awesome. Okay. Well, Minda, what's next for you? I know you said that you have a few more shorts that you're working on. Are there any other books that you're also working on?
Yeah, so I have my next book with Flatiron Books comes out July 22nd, called Talk to Me Nice: The Seven Trust Languages for a Better Workplace. Really excited about that book. And then, we'll try to hit the film festival circuit this summer with the Memo. So if you're in Martha's Vineyard in August, we are official selection there. And then hopefully the distance between, you'll get a chance to catch that somewhere as well. And, just thank you, Kevin, for what you do and helping us stay motivated and access to resources and conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. You guys are my driving force, and you continue to motivate me. And every day that I, just like you with the blog, every day that I come in front of my computer or on my phone and I'm scrolling, I'm actively learning. I look at myself as a student. I try to ask important questions from a student perspective. Um, and you can never stop learning. There's always new things to learn. There's always new people to meet. There's always new perspectives to understand and see why it is that person is thinking in this way opposed to this way. Is there a new way of doing things, or is there a quicker or more efficient way of doing things? It's always something to approach day in and day out, and with an open mind, and just soak all that information in. And it means nothing if you just hold it, so it's best to give it out to the world,
Yes.
and especially within our community where we actively are needing this information and needing the education to move forward in this business, and throughout life, but in this business, so that way we can at least attempt to level the playing field, because I feel like a lot of times while we're behind, or while we're always first in receiving some sort of award or some sort of accolade, is because we're last to receive the information of how to
Mm-hmm.
get there and how to
Yeah.
put ourselves into position. So the more we can share that information and get more of us into those positions, the more we can close that gap and level the playing field.
Amen. Amen.
So yeah. Well, Minda, I like to give my guests the final word, whether that be a quote that you like to live by, a piece of advice that was passed down to you, or words of encouragement. You've said plenty of those things throughout this entire interview, but if you have something else that you would like to share, you could say one of those three, or you could say all three. It's up to you.
Well, again, thank you for having me and allowing me to use my voice in this way. I will say that anything that we do, whether it's, filmmaking or writing books or creating music, it takes courage. And one definition of courage is the ability to do something that frightens one. But so many people came before us, and we are a direct beneficiary of their courage. So, who is going to be a beneficiary of your courage? And that requires you to go out there and make the thing and do the thing so that somebody else's life is a little bit easier when it happens. So let us all be courageous.
Yes, let us all be courageous. Yes, absolutely. But thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and just sharing some of your knowledge and some of your experiences throughout your journey with us. It's important for our audience to learn and take that in. And you drop many gems throughout this, and I'm sure we're going to have more conversations in the future. And I'm going to continue to champion you from the sidelines and watch you grow in this business, and I know that your first big feature film is coming. I know it's
I
coming.
receive it, and I want to make sure that you're there. We'll make sure you're there. Okay.
Okay,
So thank you for all that you
awesome.
do. All right.
Yes, absolutely,
All
absolutely.
right.
Minda Harts, everybody.
Thank you.